All right. Welcome back to the Demand Stacking Podcast. My name is Scott Gelber. I'm the host of the podcast. And on today's episode, we'll be chatting with Matt Trotter, who is currently the head of demand generation at Reliance Health. And we're going to talk about how to get creative with your ABM strategy. So, just a little background on Matt. Matt's worked at multiple fast growing SaaS companies and has focused a lot on targeting enterprise clients in a lot of these roles. So, he has a ton of experience executing account based strategies and implementing them. Also, I personally worked with Matt on the generation team at Diligent Corporation. And I always loved collaborating with him because he was just constantly thinking outside the box, always had new ideas um, on how to generate more pipeline for his clients. And truthfully, I just loved kind of hearing what he had to say, so I can maybe even steal what he was doing for my brands. So I'm excited to pick his brain on how he thinks about approaching ABM and what are some of the creative strategies he's using to connect with enterprise accounts. So Matt, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott. It's great to hang out again.
Yeah, as always. Cool. So I guess to kick it off, before we dive into specific tactics, I'm curious just to understand, why you prioritized account-based marketing at your previous roles, and maybe what are some of the pros and cons to implementing that strategy.
Yeah, sure. So I think the obvious one was like in previous companies, we haven't always been relevant for everyone in the industry. I've also worked for like VC companies that have mass targets where really they should be focusing on who is more like the ideal customer profile for them. A lot of kind of money and time can be wasted if you're following the wrong targets. Sometimes it comes down to asking the right questions. There's a quote by one of my favorite films, Old Boy, which is you can't find the right answers if you're not asking the right questions, and I think that is like poignant in this case. I think the other kind of reason is especially with the early like either seed round or Series A companies where you have smaller budgets, you need to be scrappy. It's an efficient way of conquering a part of the market and then maybe going on to the next one. I think with these companies, it's great to like ship new initiatives. I personally am not a very patient person. I don't enjoy red tape. I think with these smaller companies, you can target a set of accounts, be scrappy, and then kind of iterate based on the data. And then finally, I think the one that people don't really always assume with ABM is expansion. So back in the diligent days, we had an opportunity where we're working for a brand that was acquired. We had a long list of customers, some in the FTSE 100 in the UK, that were paying legacy fees and getting a very basic and historic version of the product. So we identified an opportunity there where we could offer more value, put them into cohorts, and generate more revenue through expansion ARR rather than just net new business.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I agree with you. I think ABM sometimes seems like it's something that bigger companies should be doing, but it's actually a great strategy for smaller companies because to your point, you can kind of start small, right? Like it doesn't have to be super complicated. It can just be like, hey, um, we want to get in front of these 20 accounts, so we're gonna do something special just for these 20 accounts, and it's something simple that everyone can do, just to like get going, instead of trying to create some complex strategy on how to like get consistent inbound flow. So I think that's a good point.
Yeah, to your point as well, I think if you're like segmenting that way, it's much the costs are way lower than perhaps boiling the ocean. And I think you can learn more, you can run more like different plays. But yeah, a lot of kind of VC backed companies, especially in the software space, will default to like a mass market inbound model when really they can actually move faster by being a bit more organized, understanding what good looks like to them, their ideal customer profile, and yeah, conquering that and moving on.
Yeah, it's almost like counterintuitive because to your point, everyone kind of envisions this like inbound model of like hundreds of leads coming in, and and by trying to like, I don't know, conquer the world right away, you actually like there's a lot of inefficiencies that happen there. Like one is like to your point, you kind of like miss the foundational parts of the marketing where like it's like, are you targeting the right people? Are you like, is the right messaging going to the right audience? And ABM kind of like, to your point, it's like it doesn't seem ideal to the company that wants to like generate hundreds of leads right away, but it kind of makes you focus on those fundamentals, right? It's like, okay, we're gonna target these right people. We're gonna give them the right message. We're gonna like work as a team, a sales and marketing team coordinated to like get in front of them. And then it actually like a lot of times it reduces waste, right? Because you're just spending all your time trying to get in front of the best fit accounts. So even if you're doing something expensive, um, at least it's going towards the right people. Where like sometimes when you're trying to move really fast on an inbound model, um, right, you could find out that, you know, like if you're doing Google ads, you could find out that you spent like $10,000 on a keyword that your ideal client is not actually searching for. So it is counterintuitive in that way that like it actually does. It seems like a more expensive play, but it actually avoids a lot of cost being uh, wasted.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of to your point, sorry to keep bouncing out on the first question, but stuff keeps popping up in my mind. So, to your point around like understanding keywords, it does fall back to understanding your customers or your prospects even, or even your ICP. So like being able to kind of review gong calls or speak to them in person. And then there's the other side where it's not necessarily just uh, the marketing performing better. Say if you're going after, I don't know, let's just say like enterprise financial services companies, you're then training your SDRs and sales and enabling them to have those conversations rather than a bland message to everyone, and even like your customer success team. So again, it comes back to really understanding your ICP and the prospects and customers themselves, but being way more tailored, yeah, rather than mass market.
Yeah, it's actually now that we're talking about this, it's actually it's almost like a great place to start to then like scale because to your point, you're like you're working as a team on the fundamentals, the right targeting, the right messaging, the right, and you're like learning from that, and you can pick up patterns, right, and be like, oh, like when we talk about this value prop, it resonates, or when we create content, you know, around this topic, right, our it seems like our ICP is interested, and then that's a good uh, starting point then to scale it, right, because you actually have some confidence in what campaigns are working, what content's working, what messaging is working, which decision maker is like actually engaging with your outreach. Um, so yeah, it is interesting. I never really thought of. I always just think of ABM as, you know, being a more targeted, cost effective approach for certain businesses, but it's actually a great way to nail your to nail your marketing fundamentals. So it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So let's move on. So what you're saying makes sense. I guess my next question for you is just you know, when you started in, you know, any of the roles that you've been in, where you've implemented account based marketing. I'm curious if you can just walk me through high level, like how do you think about the strategy, and what are kind of the approaches you've taken to implement this in the businesses you've worked in.
Yeah, sure. So I follow a bit of a framework, and some of this comes from all the great work that the ABM team at Snowflake do. So I learn a lot from them. But the first phase would be creating the proposal. Um, so it's understanding how big your total addressable market is, what the value to your company is, and who you're targeting. I think this really helps with getting management buy-in, trust from key stakeholders, and putting everyone on the same page. Back in the expansion campaign I referenced earlier, actually, it was our sales lead who put together the proposal by segmenting all the accounts into what best package would fit them, and then working out how much the average sales price for each package was, and then hey presto, you have your opportunity scope there, and that really kind of gets leadership interested, and you see the dollar signs in their eyes when you see the opportunity, and they're naturally more bought in. So the next part of the framework would be the list intelligence. So in the past, what I've done is I've segmented accounts into cohorts, just so you're not marketing to them all at the same time, and it's a bit more planned ahead and a bit more spread out. I think sometimes where companies do go wrong with ABM is that they target the whole total addressable market at the same time, as well as targeting them with follow-up at the same time. So it's really planning this and segmenting it out and putting them into different time periods. With the list intelligence, you can use third-party data intent tools. You can also use your first-party data intent tools, so stuff like your website, the anonymization. In the past, we've used lists for companies that have been nominated for awards, but really you're kind of working hand in hand with sales on this. It's a team effort, and the idea is that you'd have these accounts in a list for a quarter. I think, again, going back to where some companies go wrong, they'll have an account in a list for maybe a month, drop that out because I've done the research. Maybe they've just recently renewed or joined another competitor. But yeah, having a list that fits the ideal customer profile, but also I think if you can layer in some intent there, I think you're then focusing in the right place. The third phase would be activation. So this is where we start to market to the prospects. I usually like to have a matrix of like a product ad, a case study, and then a thought leadership piece, just to create that credibility. I think that's a very kind of basic version on digital ads. You can then start to be a bit more creative when you bring in events, and especially direct mail, which is one of my favorite tactics at the moment. So I don't think everyone does it. Granted, it's a little bit more difficult these days with some people working from home, but we're starting to see people go back into more like hybrid roles. So the idea here is that you've taken a cohort of accounts, you've marketed them to them for, let's just say, like a month. So they've seen your ads everywhere. They've seen branded kind of air cover emails from marketing. They've maybe been invited to an event or attended an event. And again, I do think that direct mail is the killer here. It's really cool. Like you can, depending on the prospect persona or any other context around the company. I know in the past that when we've had customers stuck or prospects already stuck in the pipeline, not moving for a while, we've sent them brownies in the post and had the message switch into us as a piece of cake. I've known some companies to send money trees in the post, which are apparently a real thing, because they can help your business grow. One of my favorites was who was it? Lumavate sent baseball cards, personalized baseball cards to sales VPs in America who would have been growing up collecting them. So yeah, you can get really creative and personalized with the DM. So let's say we've marketed to this set of accounts for a month. We then pass them over the fence to sales and SDRs. The way I'd split this is that you'd have the SDRs targeting the more junior people in the account. I would say head ofs and below. You seldom get a response or a meeting with someone more senior than that with an SDR. But the SDR's role is to book meetings with those a little bit further down the chain, but collect as much intel as possible, pass it over to their sales counterparts, and then use that to have a personalized message with, it could be a director, a VP, or a C-suite level persona. And where I think this really kind of works is when you bring personalization into it. So in the past, we've sent GIFs, as in like GIFs, the images that move, with the direct mail being shown. We've done videos. We've referenced stuff that the prospectors mentioned in their keynotes or on LinkedIn. We're not talking about where they went to college. We're talking about like everyday things that they perhaps like talk about, or their hobbies, or anything else in that level. But what I would say is that you you pass these over to sales after, let's just say, like a month of marketing, um, and it makes the conversation way more easier for sales and SDRs when they're not having to explain who your company are. The accounts are already nurtured to some extent. And then the final phase is reviewing. So always having these retrospectives with sales, getting feedback, listening to gong calls. Did we hit our metrics? Did this campaign achieve what we wanted to? If we could go back in time, would we do anything different? And then when we go back to the activation phase for the next cohort of accounts, sorry, we're then implementing those changes and measuring whether the numbers have gone up and down. I think the one thing I perhaps forgot to mention was when you pass a cohort of accounts over to sales, you're then targeting the next cohort of accounts in marketing, ready for to pass them over to sales in a month's time. And again, sometimes I mentioned earlier, sometimes companies will do this all at the same time. It's like trying to prepare, cook, and eat a meal all in like the same hour. Like really, you want to plan ahead and have some kind of linear method. But yeah, it just comes back to the proposal phase and being able to kind of plan ahead, see ahead, and manage your ABM campaign properly.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. I like how it's like super structured the way you do it. Um, you said a lot, so I want to unpack a few things. So um, one is when you do that proposal up front, are you essentially are you essentially saying like, hey, this quarter we're going to go after these accounts. Here's the potential opportunity size we see with these accounts. We're hoping to penetrate, generate opportunities with 10% of them, and we think that'll turn into this amount. And like kind of sizing it up so your team is like, okay, this seems like it's worth the focus and effort.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way I've kind of been taught to do this is exactly that. You have your target set of accounts. You have your total opportunity size. So hypothetically, if you manage to get all of those accounts into your pipeline, what that would be worth to the business. But you'd maybe have two or three different um, like hypotheses. So if we got into 50%, if we got into 30%, if we got into 20%, and what that looks like. Um, and then really you can use, if you're doing the review phase, you can use your historic data to kind of go through what you achieved previously. With ABM, you're measuring this as like an account funnel. So top would be number of accounts, then it would be number of engagements, then it would be number of accounts you have like meetings with. Very similar to like an accumulated inbound model. Um, so yeah, you'd be able to use historical data. If not, you can just create a hypothesis and then um, just like use that as your starting point and benchmark that moving forward.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about reporting. So it's good you already touched on that. When you're reporting, I get the funnel. Um, how are you like? Yeah, how are you measuring engagement? How are you like showing what marketing did versus sales did? Are you not showing that? Just like how do you think about reporting and showing the effectiveness of the strategy?
Yeah, sure. So like just using the inbound model as an example, sometimes The way that especially software companies are set up, you have the inbound versus outbound model, and it's almost like sales are accountable for the outbound model, and marketing are accountable for the inbound model, and it's kind of like you're competing against each other. Whereas with ABM, to be successful, it's a team effort, and you execute this as a team. The better your marketing is and your cadences are, the easier it is for sales. Um, so it's not necessarily. I think something I've made an error of in the past is kind of having a target set of accounts to go after, but then just focusing on an inbound model. So how many people ask for pricing or a demo, for example. So the way you'd want to measure this is having like an uplift versus cold prospecting as a kind of like a control variable. So let's just say you have 100 accounts that you're targeting, and you get into, or you're targeting 40% of these, so you want to get 40% in your pipeline, or let's just say meetings with 40%. Maybe you'd have a control variable of, let's just say, I don't know, 20 for easy maths, and then let's say you hit the target of the actual ABM campaign and you do get 40 meetings, and then that's a 40% conversion rate. With the control variable, let's say you get I don't know, 2 meetings out of 20, that's a 10% conversion rate. So then you can start to compare what the uplift versus the control variable is. So 40% versus 10%. And then you can start to work out, okay, because we ran this program, our prospecting, or our kind of success rate of getting into these accounts was 4x. So we have a delta of 30. So by doing this, we managed to get into 30 more accounts than we would have if we just did our usual cold prospecting. And that's the way you really sell it to sales and get their buy-in as well, because then they're starting to think, oh, okay, prospecting is probably like the most difficult part of my job. But if I work with marketing as a partner on this, and we're aligned and we execute the plan properly, I'm going to get 4 times as many accounts into my pipeline. And that's like a huge selling point for like internal buy-in. Yeah, and then just to kind of reiterate my point before, you don't really measure it on like an inbound model. You have your account-based funnel, and measure that way.
Yeah, that I like that. I like the idea of having the cohort and like seeing the lift, because one of the challenges, one of the things I like about the ABM model is like everyone's just driving towards one goal. There's no marketing does this, sales does that. But one of the challenges with this model is it's not always clear cut how marketing is helping drive results. And you can get into a situation where like maybe you hit your goal on target accounts that you generated pipeline with, but it's really hard to understand what marketing's what's marketing's involvement in that. And you can say like, oh well, we served them ads and like did this and that, and it's just really hard, right? Sometimes people don't buy it, as opposed to like if someone comes directly from a Google ad to fills out a form, right? It's very clear cut that marketing generated that.
Yeah.
So that's always the challenging part, and part of that is just like the company has to buy in on that. But your example is good, because then it's like, well, we did the same exact thing for two sets of accounts, although one got these ads, got these direct mails, got all this marketing support, and it clearly was more efficient or better results. So I like that, because that kind of solves for that last piece of just like protecting yourself on that your marketing team actually helped, with those results.
Yeah, I think they're kind of like tangible results that are meaningful to sales. I think I've seen marketing teams in the past fall short where they've said, "Oh, we're successful because we delivered these ads to this business and these emails," and there's no kind of proof that it's kind of been effective or accountability to like a pipeline number. So yeah, it's important to not get caught in that trap.
Yeah, I really like that. And then I like I always thought about like selling it to the sales team as like, hey, we're gonna help you get in front of your best accounts or your highest value accounts, which I think is compelling. But I like the way you said it as well, which is like, hey, I actually think this is gonna increase your efficiency with prospecting. So instead of you having to, you know, prospect 50 contacts a day, it might be 25 doing it. And that's actually a really great value prop because you know prospecting is hard and time consuming.
Yeah, sales
So
hate.
that's like another yeah, it's hard. It's hard, right? And it's monotonous. But if yeah, like that's I think that's actually even that might be even more compelling than the way I would frame it because it's like, hey,
Yeah,
I'll save you half the time and you'll get in front of better accounts that'll close at a higher rate and for higher deal sizes. That like that's
yeah.
really compelling.
I think as well, like the way I've been taught is that you either work in sales or you work for sales. So um, uh, again, like our job is to make their job easier, and I think if you can show that uplift, and that's your proof point, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah. The other thing is just alignment. You know, just like agreeing with them on, hey, we're all gonna focus on the accounts that matter the most to the business and to you. I think that goes a long way to one of the companies I worked at um, was heavily account based, and the sales team actually cared more about who they were talking to rather than like how many. You know,
Yeah,
obviously the number mattered, but they really cared about who, and the business really cared about who because it was such a small addressable market. So even if we were like even if we were driving leads or you know meetings, and they were just with like these no name accounts, they would take it, but they didn't care that much. And once we shifted to like an account based model, and we would go to them and be like, hey, we know these are the accounts you care about. Here are the things we're gonna do to try to help you get in front of them. There was so much more cooperation and so much more appreciation for what we did. And if we did get in front of one of those accounts, they were like, you know, nice job marketing, as opposed to, oh, a small no name account came in inbound. It was like, cool, I'll take the call, but I don't really care. So I think there's also alignment that comes with, you know, really strong alignment that comes with doing this strategy.
yeah, right on.
Um, cool. So let's keep it moving. What are some of the biggest mistakes you would recommend other demand gen marketers avoid when implementing an ABM strategy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it seems obvious, but not building out a proper plan and getting buy-in. And then I think the most important part of it is the total addressable market opportunity there, because that really helps get like sales excited, leadership excited, helps you secure more budget, and it really helps the company understand what you're trying to achieve. And then I'd say the next one, I know I've mentioned this already, but measuring success on an inbound funnel. I think if you're just waiting for people to complete forms, especially like when you're targeting larger accounts, you're going to be waiting a very long time. The idea of this is to make prospecting easier and catalyze that outbound model. Um, I think probably the biggest one is doing everything at once. So just setting up your ads, and then the following day, the salesperson's reaching out, and then you have a direct mail go out after. Um, I think if you can be really structured, put your accounts into cohorts, plan your year or your quarter, and then have this like well-oiled machine. I think that is probably like the secret sauce to making ABM work. When you say it out loud, it makes sense, but a lot of companies will just do it all at the same time, and again, they'll probably do it on like a 1 month basis where they're trying to do everything, when really um, you probably want to be marketing to an account for at least a month, maybe even longer, and then have your follow up after that. And again, anyone who's worked at large VC backed companies will have these very challenging targets, which kind of encourages them to follow that growth at all cost mentality and go hell for leather. And it makes this kind of structuring and cohorts quite challenging. But again, if you get your proposal nailed down and you plan it out properly, that's where you'll win on this. And then I think the final thing is as well, and again I mentioned this before, is just seeing it as a way of getting into new accounts, when really it's a way of segmenting your existing customer base, or even like your pipeline, um, and doing something a bit more like tailored and personalized there. Again, you'd measure it in the same way in terms of having a controlled variable and measuring the uplift. Um, but I think, like, for example, in the pipeline marketing, you could measure the uplift in win rate. For expansion marketing, you can measure the uplift in kind of contract value. Um, there's also like the cross sell side as well with expansion, not necessarily just upsell. So there's loads of different ways you can use it for, um, and yeah, it's not just getting into new accounts.
Cool. Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me from this conversation is the cohort structure that you do, because you're right, it can get like really messy. First of all, it can just get messy from a focus perspective of just like, right, you load all your your total addressable market into LinkedIn or your email campaigns, and it's really hard to keep track of all of it. And then from the coordination side, it's also really difficult to like surface to your team who's engaging, what's like, when should they reach out. So the cohort model seems to um, not only make it more organized for the team, but then you can also report back to your team and your executives and actually show like, hey, we decided to target these 100 accounts over the last 3 months. We did these specific things, and here were the results. And it to me that would make a lot more sense of the success, rather than like this mishmash of all these different campaigns and then like trying to report back on how you're doing. So I think that's a really good takeaway. Um, cool. So I want to talk a little bit about just like creativity in marketing and demand gen and thinking outside the box. You tend to think outside the box a lot with your campaigns, and I'm curious, just why do you take this approach, and how did you build this mindset when implementing demand gen plans?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is that like B2B marketing can be very boring. It's very like overly professional and stuffy, and also numbers driven. So you'll find that a lot of marketers will only execute what they can measure, and that normally defaults to digital. And then you just appear in like the same place, saying the same things as your competitors. It's very saturated. What I love doing is taking ideas from B2C brands, but also hearing what some of the other creative B2B brands do. I think my favorite brand for this is Gong. I remember their coffee is for closers, Super Bowl ad, which was different for a B2B company. And then having that incentive where if you shared the video on LinkedIn, you would get, I think it was like a t-shirt or something. So if you went onto LinkedIn one afternoon, you saw this ad everywhere. Everyone in like the sales and marketing network was sharing it, and then a week later, everyone was sharing pictures of their t-shirts, which was cool. Um, so yeah, I think as well, like on the numbers driven side, it generally generates the wrong behavior. Um, I think with this kind of martech shift, you see it's like marketing has become a bit more of a science, pretty like too much that way. When really it needs to shift back to the Don Draper days, where it's more of an art. Um, but yeah, I'd say as well, like in like software, there's new softwares popping up every day. It's becoming like a very saturated market, and I think there's a great opportunity to stand out. Different is sometimes better than better, and I think especially in the saturated markets, if you can be likable, memorable, and top of mind, that certainly goes along. And then my final point would be Um, like even if people are working in B2B, your target audience is B2B. They're still people. They still laugh. I remember when I joined Diligent, you're marketing to governance professionals. When you think of people working in governance, and certainly if you saw our marketing back then for the brand I was working on, you would assume they were lonely people sitting in windowless offices, wondering how they got there in life. But really, like I remember sitting on product calls with the product team to find out what they thought about the product, any feedback they had. They were just like normal people wearing t-shirts, laughing, joking. And I think the more we can understand our customers and reflect that in our marketing, the more relevant and more successful it is.
Yeah, I always think it's funny when B2B marketers talk about their audience, and they're always like these people, they care about the ROI, they want to know how it's going to benefit them. um, and it's ridiculous because these are the same people that are watching reality TV and Netflix on the weekend. They're not like reading Gartner reports on the weekend. It's like it's just such a ridiculous claim. Yeah, yes, like obviously they have to see some logic in why they should buy your solution, but it's just it's so backwards to your point. These people like being entertained, and there's such a small amount of companies that are actually doing entertaining things in B2B marketing. So if you can figure out how to do that, it's such an advantage. So it is funny.
Yeah, you definitely stand out. Like these people, like they'll share memes, they'll share like social posts. Again, it goes back to yeah, understanding your customers. But I think where a lot of marketing teams go wrong, they just falsely assume, and they kind of build up this own image in their own heads of what their target market is like, and it's more often than not incorrect.
Yeah, it's like an ad with like a funny meme probably would perform better than an ad that just says, increase your productivity by 15%. But we always default to the second one for some reason. It's
Yeah,
hard. It's
and
hard
then
to. Because that's so ingrained in the B2B culture. It's so hard to like go outside of it because everyone is just thinking you should do it one way, and then if it doesn't work, it's like it just feels risky, right? It feels like really risky, which is stupid, but that is what it feels like.
yeah, definitely. And I think if you're that company who are the former, the ones that are being a little bit more jovial in your marketing, you're going to be the one that stands out and is memorable versus the other 5 to 10 that will looking the same, saying the same thing, have stock imagery in their marketing of people wearing suits and shaking hands. Um, yeah, you're just going to get lost there.
Yeah, that's a funny one too. It's just like you purposely put people in suits like shaking hands in the ads. It's like no one identifies with that. Like it's like, oh, that's me who's shaking, like I identify with that. It's like no one identifies with that, which that is a funny thing that I've also done in the past. um cool. So can you talk a little bit about some like creative approaches you've taken with your ABM strategy specifically? Any examples come to mind that were super creative, and if you could just share what the thought process was and maybe what the results were, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'll share a concept from when I was at Privitar, which is like a data software company, well, before it was acquired by Informatica. And I'll kind of go through it in the same logic as before. But first, like when you sit on calls with our personas, which were data teams, or you meet with them at events, this is slightly stereotyping, but there was a trend where they'd be a little bit kind of awkward. They'd be wearing their Marvel t-shirts. I mean, this isn't all of them, but a lot of them are like that, very kind of techie. But again, just going back to our point before, very very fun, like joking, etc. Can laugh at themselves and see the funny sides of things. And what we did was we ran a Data Heroes campaign. And what that looked like, we had it was kind of like a testimonial guide. So both influencers, but also people in our client network sharing how they're contributing to their organization's biggest goals. And we had this designed like a comic book, um, which went out to everyone in our total addressable market, or our target account list even. We sent bobbleheads of the our target personas received data hero bobbleheads of themselves. So Scott, if you're in our target account list, you would receive a bobblehead of yourself as a superhero in Privatar branded colors, which would definitely grab your attention. We had that in the outreach by the SDRs with the gifts when they're waving them. Um, we had what was it, Cadbury Miniature Heroes, which is like a candy in the UK. We had the box branded in Privatar colors, and then the tagline for the whole thing was with great data comes great responsibility. So shamelessly plagiarizing Spider-Man there. But what we did with the list, we layered in intent, so people who are searching our transactional keywords, so data security software, data privacy platform, all of those. The more kind of bottom funnel and transactional ones rather than the high volume, low intent keywords. We layered on, at the time, there are a lot of awards in data. So we put people on our list that were targeted for awards, and we could see their achievements and their priorities at their company, and a lot of that was taken into the personalization and outreach by SDRs and sales, which is pretty cool. So on the personalized outreach, again, we had GIFs and videos from SDRs showing either the box of miniature heroes or the bobblehead. We had these GIF versions of the SDRs as well. So they had their professional picture in their email signature, but that was a GIF, and it changed to a superhero, which is quite cool. And yeah, we ran a series of ads, emails, and then obviously the direct mail before sales and SDRs followed up with those prospects, which is cool.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's a really cool campaign. And it's cool. It's cool that you can not only see lift in pipeline, but like do something cool that like gets buzz as well. So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
I think the best thing about it was, well, like none of our competitors were doing that or something similar. So again, sometimes I mentioned before, different is sometimes better than better. I think sometimes to stand out, you need to be in different places to your competitors and running different tactics. And again, I think the other thing as well is, especially for the pilot of that campaign, um, it was like a very, very low cost. I don't think I could share the budget, but we were able to test it on like a low level, have that as our business case, like limit the risk, and then put that into our proposal for our plan to scale it out.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that sometimes be like ABM doesn't always, or being creative or ABM doesn't always mean like spending more. A lot of times you think of doing even more special things as a creative way, but that's not it's not necessarily true, right? There's ways to be creative in cost effective ways to get their attention. So it's a good point. Cool. Last question for you. What advice would you give to other companies that are trying to get more creative with their campaigns and are maybe afraid to take risks?
Yeah, sure. So my first one would be, don't see it as account-based marketing, see it as an account-based go-to-market. Sales are just as involved as marketing. We're not there to be tyrants. So first and foremost, understand your customers, do your research for the intelligence part, make sure you have stuff that you can use to personalize your outreach and even your ads. Work with sales. I think as well, sometimes like sales know your customers better than anyone. They spend their whole days talking to them. They form relationships with them. Sometimes the best ideas come from sales. I mentioned before, the sales leader at Diligent put together the proposal for the expansion ABM campaign, but also had it in the past where that switching to us as a piece of cake. That was actually an idea from sales. Um, they came with context that a set of accounts were taking a long time to close, and the main friction part was that they felt that with all the integrations, etc., it was going to be a long and arduous process in terms of transitioning to us, and a lot of work for them. Um, so yeah, we were able to send those out, some content around some other customers that have done something different, something similar, sorry, and worked with our services team to make the transition. Um, I would say show where your competitors don't show up, just to stand out and claim that space. Um, Again, a lot of like software companies in particular will default to LinkedIn because you can target accounts at account level there. Um, it's where I really think that direct mail comes into it, and it helps you stand out and start relationships. And then my final piece of advice would be to look at what other brands are doing. It doesn't have to be just in B2B, it can be B2C as well, particularly in other industry or targeting other industries to the ones you target. That Data Heroes idea, it came from the Lumavate baseball cards idea, where they had the prospects picture on the baseball cards. I've also seen newspapers be sent out with the prospects picture on, with a date in the future, saying how they drove the company's goal, the company's growth even. So yeah, I think you don't have to be so creative that you're constantly creating all these concepts from scratch. You can literally take inspiration from other brands and evolve that, and tailor it to your personas.
Yeah, I love that last piece of advice. Like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just see what other companies are doing, and if you're just being mindful every time you see something that's creative or you liked, just like write it down or take a screenshot or whatever it is, and you can probably just copy the same exact campaign, but do it for your persona. Like, you could do the bobblehead idea, but make it marketing heroes, right? It's like, you know, to your point, like, it's all around you if you just like pay attention, and then just like whatever you thought was really creative and could work for your business, just do the same thing. So I think copying is definitely a good way to be creative.
Yeah, yeah, right. My screenshots on my phone. It sounds very lame and embarrassing, but just full of other marketing teams, ideas and campaigns, and yeah, if you tailor it to your audience, um, they'll never guess it's come from someone else.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, those are all the questions I had, Matt. This was super informative, so thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me, Scott. It's good to see you again.
Yep, good to see you.